are things that happen to you in life that you never see coming, not because you weren't paying attention, but because you were paying attention to the wrong person. I was 61 years old when I found out my daughter had been stealing from me for almost 2 years. Not a stranger, not a co-worker. My daughter. The one I coached in Little League because there wasn't a girls' team yet, and I wasn't going to tell her she couldn't play. The one I drove to every college visit up and down the East Coast in a car with no working air conditioning because she had a list and she wanted to see every single campus on it. The one who cried at my retirement party and said into the microphone in front of everyone that I was the strongest man she had ever known. I think about that speech a lot now. My name is not important. What happened to me is, my wife, Irene, was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease when she was 58 years old. I want you to understand what that means before I go any further because I think a lot of people hear Parkinson's and picture an elderly man with a tremor. Irene was 58. She had just retired from 26 years as a middle school librarian. She had a garden she'd been planning for a decade. She had a trip to Portugal we'd been saving for since our youngest started college. She had plans. We had plans. The diagnosis didn't arrive all at once. It never does. It starts with small things. A hand that won't cooperate. A hesitation in her step that I noticed before she did. A tiredness that sleep didn't fix. She thought it was stress. I thought it was stress. I thought it was stress. Her primary care doctor thought it was stress. It took 2 neurologists and 14 months to get the word that changed everything. Parkinson's at that stage and that age is not immediately catastrophic. The progression is slow at first and then it isn't. We had maybe 2 good years after the diagnosis before her mobility started declining in ways that couldn't be managed with medication adjustments alone. By the time I'm telling you this story, she needed help getting dressed in the morning. She needed help in the bathroom. She needed someone with her round the clock, and that someone for the first 3 years was me. I want to be honest about what that does to a person. I'm not complaining. I chose it. I would choose it again, but caregiving for someone you love, especially when the disease is progressive. Especially when you watch them disappear piece by piece in front of you while they're still right there. It hollows you out in ways you can't explain to anyone who hasn't been through it. You stop sleeping through the night. You stop eating at regular times. You start measuring your days not by what happened, but by what didn't go wrong. A good day is a day when nothing gets worse. That's the bar. My daughter Simone lived 40 minutes away in Raleigh. She had a good job. She worked in commercial real estate, made decent money, drove a nice car. She had a boyfriend, Isaac, who I liked. Polite, kept his word, good with eye contact. They'd been together about 4 years at that point. I thought he was going to propose. I was glad about that. Simone started coming around more after Irene's condition progressed. That was about 18 months before everything fell apart. She'd come on weekends, sometimes during the week, bring groceries, sit with her mother while I got a few hours of sleep. I was grateful. I told her that more than once. I told Isaac, too, when I saw him, that I didn't know what I would do without her. I meant it. About 14 months before I found out what was really happening, Simone brought up power of attorney. She was practical about it. She sat me down at the kitchen table one Sunday after dinner. Irene was asleep, and she had a folder. An actual manila folder with printed pages inside. She said a friend of hers had gone through something similar with her father, and the family had been completely unprepared when things declined quickly. She said she wasn't trying to be morbid, just realistic. She said she wanted to make sure I had protection. I trusted her. That's what I need you to understand. This wasn't a stranger with a slick pitch. This was my daughter sitting across from me at the table where she'd eaten 1,000 dinners, with a folder and a concerned expression and a voice that sounded exactly like the person who loved me. She explained that it would give her authority to handle finances if I became incapacitated. She said it was just a precaution. She said we could set it up so it was a springing POA, meaning it only activated under specific medical conditions. She explained the terminology. She'd done research. She seemed prepared, and her being prepared made me feel cared for rather than managed. I signed the papers that evening. She said she'd take them to the notary the next day. I didn't go with her. I want to stop here and tell you something I later learned from the attorney who helped me, a man named Mr. Calloway, who'd been handling elder law cases for 30 years and who delivered every piece of bad news to me with the steadiness of someone who'd had to do it many times before. He told me that a power of attorney document, to be legally valid, must be signed in the presence of a notary public. The notary must witness the signature, that is the entire point of the notary, to verify that the person signing is who they say they are, that they're signing voluntarily, that they are of sound mind. If someone takes a pre-signed document to a notary after the fact, the notary cannot legally notarize it. If a notary does stamp it anyway, the notary has committed fraud, and the document itself is invalid. Simone took my signed papers to a notary who stamped them without witnessing my signature. I don't know how she found that notary. I don't know what she said or paid to make that happen. What I know is that for the next 14 months, she had a document she believed gave her legal control over my finances, and she used it. The withdrawals started small. I didn't notice because I wasn't monitoring closely. I was managing a household, managing Irene's medications and appointments, managing the 7,000 invisible tasks that come with being the sole caregiver for someone with a progressive neurological condition. I was not sitting down every week to reconcile my bank statements. I know that sounds irresponsible. I know what it sounds like. I am telling you the truth about what my days looked like. The first time anything caught my attention, it wasn't even my attention. It was Isaac's. It was a Sunday in March, about 11 months after Simone had taken those papers to the notary. We were all having dinner together. Isaac had started coming with her on the weekend visits, which I liked. It made it feel more like family. Irene was having a better evening than usual. She was at the table with us, which didn't always happen. She was following the conversation and even laughed once at something Isaac said, and I remember thinking that some days still feel like normal. Some days you can almost forget. After dinner, Simone and her mother were watching television in the living room. I was doing dishes. Isaac came into the kitchen and asked if he could help, and I said no, I was fine. And then he just stood there in the way that people stand when they've decided to say something they've been carrying for a while. He said he needed to talk to me about something. He said he didn't know if he was overreacting. He said Simone didn't know he was saying anything, and he needed me to know that before he said it. Then he told me that 3 weeks earlier, he had accidentally seen a bank statement on Simone's laptop. He hadn't meant to look. He'd been trying to print something and opened the wrong window. He said the account wasn't one he recognized, and the balance was substantial. He said he'd asked her about it, and she told him it was an inheritance account she was managing for a client at work. He said he'd accepted that, but something had been bothering him since, and he didn't know why, and it wasn't until that week when she'd mentioned offhandedly that she needed to make another transfer for Dad's account that he'd started to feel sick. He said he was probably wrong. He said he hoped he was wrong. He asked me to check my accounts when I got the chance. Then he went back into the living room. I stood at the kitchen sink with the water running for a long time. I didn't check that night. I told myself I was going to wait until I had a clear head, until Irene was settled, until I had time to sit down with the statements and actually understand what I was looking at. But the real reason I waited is that I didn't want to find what I was afraid I was going to find. When you've already been living for 3 years in a world where things keep getting worse, there's a part of your brain that just refuses to open one more door. I had 3 years of practice at not looking at things that might break me. I waited 4 days. On Thursday morning, Irene had a home health aide come for 6 hours. A woman named Ms. Patterson, who'd been coming twice a week for about 4 months and who Irene trusted, which mattered enormously. I sat down at the kitchen table with my laptop and my reading glasses and a cup of coffee, and I opened my retirement account, my checking account, and the joint savings account that Irene and I had been contributing to since 1991. I'm not going to tell you exactly how much was missing because the number matters less than what it represented. I will tell you that Irene and I had spent 32 years building that savings account, depositing a portion of every paycheck, not touching it, watching it grow. We had plans for that money. Part of it was for Irene's care, for a proper memory care facility if it came to that, or for in-home nursing, or for the modifications to the house that would allow her to stay home safely as the disease progressed. Part of it was just ours, the accumulation of a life we'd built together. More than 60% of it was gone. The withdrawals were spread out. Never the same amount twice. never so large that a single transaction would be flagged as unusual. Transfers to an account I didn't recognize, transfers to what looked like a business account, some cash withdrawals at ATMs in Raleigh and in 2 cities in South Carolina that I had no reason to be in and hadn't been in. I sat at that table for a long time without moving. Then I called a number I'd saved in my phone a year earlier and never expected to use, a lawyer, Mr. Calloway, who someone at my church had mentioned when the subject of elder law had come up at a men's breakfast one Saturday morning. I'd written his name down on a notepad and transferred it to my phone because I am the kind of person who writes things down. I had no idea, at the time, that I was writing down the number of the man who would eventually help me get my life back. Mr. Calloway answered on the second ring. I told him I thought someone had been using a power of attorney document to access my accounts without my knowledge. He asked me 3 questions, calmly, the way people ask questions when they already know the answer and just need confirmation. Then he told me to bring everything I had, the POA document, the bank statements, whatever I could access, to his office the following morning. I told my daughter nothing. That was the hardest part, not the drive to the lawyer's office, not sitting across from Mr. Calloway while he walked through every transaction on a printed spreadsheet and told me in plain language what had happened, not even calling the bank to initiate a fraud hold. The hardest part was the following Sunday when Simone came to the house as usual, walked in the door, hugged me, kissed her mother on the forehead, and sat down at the table where we'd been having family dinners for 20 years. She made small talk. She asked about Irene's last neurologist appointment. She helped me set down plates, and I sat across from her and I watched her, and I thought about all 34 years of her life. From the morning she was born in the hospital on New Bern Avenue to the night she made that speech at my retirement party. And I tried to find the moment where something had shifted. I don't know if I found it. I'm not sure the moment exists the way I wanted it to. Isaac wasn't there that Sunday. He'd texted me earlier that week briefly, just to ask if I'd had a chance to look into things. I texted back 2 words, working on it. He replied, "I'm sorry." I think that was all he could say. Mr. Calloway moved quickly. He had a forensic accountant review the statements. He documented the notarization issue, contacted the notarization board, which opened its own investigation. He filed a report with the financial crimes unit at the local sheriff's office. He contacted the 3 financial institutions involved. The POA document, it turned out, was exactly what he suspected. Invalid. The notary had not witnessed my signature. The document could not be legally enforced and never could have been. Everything Simon had done using it was unauthorized. Mr. Calloway used the word theft. He said it the same way he said everything, calmly and without editorial. But I heard it. That word sits differently when the person attached to it is someone you raised. Simone was served with papers on a Wednesday morning. She called me from the parking lot of her office, and I let it go to voicemail. She called 3 more times. Then she stopped calling. I heard, through Isaac, who had quietly moved out of their apartment and told me so in a short, formal text, that she'd hired an attorney. I don't know what she told that attorney. I don't know what she told that attorney. I don't know what story she told herself to justify what she'd done. I've spent a lot of hours. I'll never get back trying to understand how a person gets from point A to where she ended up. And I've come to the conclusion that I'm probably not the right person to understand it. Maybe that's something she has to figure out for herself, if she ever does. What I do know is what happened next. The civil case moved forward. The criminal investigation. Elder financial abuse in North Carolina carries serious consequences, including felony charges when the amounts involved exceed certain thresholds, was ongoing for several months. I won't go into every detail because some of it is still working through the system and my attorney has advised me about what I should and shouldn't say publicly. What I can tell you is that the unauthorized transfers were documented. The account she'd been moving money into was identified. Some of the funds were recovered. Not all of them. Enough. The bank. I've been a customer at the same regional bank for 27 years, was cooperative once the situation was made clear. They flagged several of the transactions retroactively as suspicious, transactions their own system should have caught and didn't. They were, I think, embarrassed. There were conversations. There were outcomes from those conversations that I'm not going to discuss in detail. But I will say that the bank's response ultimately reflected the length of my relationship with them and the circumstances of what had happened. Irene is still at home. Miss Patterson comes 5 days a week now. There's a physical therapist who comes on Tuesdays. Irene has good days and harder days, and I have learned to hold both without letting one cancel out the other. That's not wisdom I was born with. That's something that gets built in you, slowly, through a lot of mornings where you didn't know how you were going to get through the day, and then you did. There are things I want to say to anyone listening to this who is in a position like the one I was in. Anyone who is caregiving for a spouse, anyone who is aging and relying on family members for financial help, anyone who has signed documents without fully understanding what they were signing. Get your own attorney before you sign any power of attorney document. That attorney should work for you, not for the person presenting you with the papers. Don't sign anything that you won't be present to have notarized in real time. If someone is taking documents to a notary on your behalf, something is wrong with the process and you should stop and ask why. Set of account alerts. Every major bank now has the ability to send you a text or email notification every time a transaction over a certain amount occurs. It takes about 10 minutes to set up. It costs nothing. It would have changed my story. Consider a revocable living trust, especially if you have a spouse with a serious illness and you have assets you want protected. It is not only for wealthy people. Mr. Calloway told me that the single most common misconception he encounters in his practice is that estate planning is only necessary once you have a lot of money. It is necessary whenever you have anything you don't want someone to take from you, and if someone in your life is showing you unusual interest in your finances, even if that someone is your child. Even if they have a good explanation, even if they seem to be doing it out of love, pay attention to that feeling in your stomach. You know the one I mean, the one that says something is slightly off, the one you talk yourself out of because it seems ungrateful or paranoid or unkind. I am asking you to stop talking yourself out of it. Isaac still texts me sometimes. He asked how Irene was doing on her last birthday, sent a small gift through the mail. I called him to thank him, and we talked for about 20 minutes about nothing in particular, and then he said he was sorry about how things turned out, and I said I was sorry too, and we both meant something different by it, but the feeling was the same. I don't know where Simone is today. That sentence took me a long time to be able to type without my hands shaking. Irene asked about her last month. She has good days and harder days, and on the good days she remembers things clearly. And on this particular day, she asked me where Simone had been lately and why she hadn't come around. I told her that Simone had been dealing with some things. Irene looked at me for a moment, the way she has always been able to look at me, like she can see through the front of my face and directly into whatever's happening behind it. And she said, "Is she okay?" I said I didn't know. Irene reached over and put her hand on mine and held it there, not saying anything. And I thought about 36 years of marriage and what it means to be held by someone who knows you well enough to know when you don't have any more words. I am not okay. Some days. I am okay enough, most days. I am still here. Irene is still here. The accounts are being rebuilt slowly, the way accounts get rebuilt when you are 61 years old and you did not plan for this particular setback. There are harder mornings than I expected at this point in my life. There are also mornings when the light comes through the window in the kitchen at a certain angle and hits the garden. Irene planted 7 years ago, the one she can't tend anymore, but that I have been tending for her because I don't know how to let it go. And in those mornings I think about how much we build together and how much of it no one can take. That part, no one can take. If you found this story because someone sent it to you or because you were up late and couldn't sleep and needed to know you weren't alone in what you're going through, I hope it helped something. I hope you check your accounts tomorrow morning. I hope you make that phone call you've been putting off. I hope you tell the people who are actually in your corner how much they mean to you. Because the Isaac in your life deserves to hear it. And if you're carrying something like what I carried, something heavy that you haven't been able to say out loud yet, I want you to know that saying it out loud doesn't make it worse. It makes it real. And real, as hard as real is something you can actually do something about. I'll see you in the next one. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually went wrong. Not legally. Mr. Calloway handled the legal part. I mean what went wrong before any of that. Where the real failure started. And I keep coming back to the same place. I confused love with trust. I thought they were the same thing. They're not. You can love someone completely and still not be the right person to manage their affairs. You can love someone and still be in enough financial trouble, enough personal desperation, that you start rationalizing things you would never have imagined doing 5 years earlier. Simone didn't start as a thief. I don't believe that. What I believe is that she started as a daughter who was drowning in something she never told me about. And she made a choice, and then she made another choice to cover the first one, and by the time I found out, she was so far down that road that there was no easy way back. That doesn't excuse it. It just means that the story isn't as simple as, my daughter was a bad person. The story is more uncomfortable than that. The story is that I gave one person complete, unmonitored control over everything I had built, and I did it because I loved her. And love without structure is not protection. It's an opening. That's the thing nobody tells you about getting older. You spend so much of your life being the one who handles things, the one who makes decisions, the one other people come to when they're overwhelmed. And then your circumstances shift, and suddenly you need help. And the instinct is to hand that help to whoever is closest and whoever you love most. That instinct is understandable. It is also dangerous, because the people closest to you are also the people with the most access, the most information, and sometimes, not always, but sometimes the most complicated feelings about what you have and what will eventually happen to it. Isaac didn't have to say anything to me that night in the kitchen. He could have stayed quiet, let things continue, convinced himself it wasn't his business. A lot of people would have done exactly that. What he chose instead took a kind of moral courage that I don't think gets named correctly. It wasn't dramatic. He wasn't angry or righteous about it. He was just honest and uncertain, and he said the thing anyway. That matters. That kind of quiet honesty, done without reward and at real personal cost, is one of the rarest things one human being can offer another. Irene is still here. Some mornings are hard. Some mornings the light comes through the kitchen window in a way that makes everything feel possible again. And on those mornings I sit with my coffee and I think about what we've survived, and I feel something that I can only describe as earned. Not happiness exactly. Something steadier than happiness. Something that doesn't depend on things going right. I rebuilt the accounts, slowly, not all the way back yet, but far enough that Irene has what she needs, and I have what I need, and we still have each other, which was always the point. If there is one thing I want you to take from what I've been through, it's this. The structures you build around your finances are not a sign that you don't trust your family. They are a sign that you understand how the world actually works, and that you respect yourself enough to protect what you built. Set up the alerts. Make the appointment with the attorney. Have the conversation you've been putting off. Not because you suspect anyone, because you love yourself and your spouse enough to not leave things to chance. That's not cynicism. That's wisdom. There's a difference. And it took me 61 years and a very painful few months to understand it all the way down to the bone.